In this clip we're going to think a little bit more about the vertical spacing of our harmony. If we look at the top right of the screen, we can see the hymn we've been working on, the two phrases, and I've got in the harmony, and we've been using this top-down method, so all of the voices are spaced from the top down. So there's a tendency for all of the upper voices, the top three parts, to be crushed towards the top, creating a compact texture at the top. Now that's fine up to a point. It's suitable. We've applied some other textures in the semiquaver pattern, which makes a slightly pianistic texture, and that's absolutely fine. As it stands just now, even this chordal approach is fine. However, when we space for voices or for brass or strings, this is not really ideal, because it doesn't really resonate appropriately for the instruments. We want to think about ways in which we can create a more resonant sound, a warmer sound when we're spacing chords. We have to think a bit more carefully now about the vertical spacing of each of these chords. So what we need to do first of all is have a think about the harmonic series. I'll not go into great depths about what the harmonic series is. You can look that up yourself in the Grove Dictionary, or a number of internet resources which will explain it in great depth. But put simply, if you take this G here and imagine you were playing that on a cello, or someone was playing it on the cello on the open G string, when that string is bowed, you get very strongly this note, but hidden within the note as part of the substance of the note, you also get the G an octave higher, the D an octave and a fifth, 2 octaves above the G, B, D, a sort of F natural, 7th, and G, and so on to infinity. These notes are all sounding, and the higher up you get, the more faint these notes become. These are called the harmonics. So this is the fundamental, the actual note which is produced, and these harmonics, depending on the strength, those will give a particular. Well, those actually create the timbre of the sound. It's the strength of each of these harmonics that creates the sonority that you recognise as being a cello. At least that's it put very simply. It's a bit more complicated than that. If you want to know more, you can go and look it up. So I've got the harmonic series here on this G, and I've also got it sounding an octave, exactly the same thing, an octave lower, which shows some of the other harmonics above the 8th harmonic. I've put the numbers in, so we number them from 1, the fundamentals 1, and then numbering the harmonics 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, etc. This is a 9th and 10th harmonic, all the way up to infinity. So why is this thing important, this harmonic series? Well, it's important because when you have two notes sounding together, they sound consonant when they fit together in terms of the harmonic series. So this G sounding with this G sounds consonant because all of the harmonics of those two notes are matching up. There's no conflict. Whereas if I just took the G here with this D, most of the harmonics will match up, but there'll be one or two places where the harmonics of the two notes don't match up, and you get a slight beating of the notes. They don't sound entirely consonant, although generally speaking, this perfect fifth is pretty consonant. So we consider that to be a consonance in terms of harmony, and so forth. The further up you go, when you sound these pitches together, they sound less and less consonant. That's again put fairly simply. So it gets more complicated when we're putting numbers and notes together. If we look at this second bar here at the bottom, we've got the G, D, B. That's our top-down method, and you can imagine we've got a G here. I've got these numbers underneath which represent the harmonics. If you can imagine, there's a G not sounding, which is actually sounding down there. That's the fundamental. So the fundamental is not there. So we're starting with the second note of the harmonic series, or the first overtone. It's called the first harmonic. We'll number it 2. We've got 2 there. We don't have third harmonic or the fourth, but we have number 5. This B here, and we have number 6, not number 7, number 8. So this is telling us, on the basis of there being a G fundamental an octave below this G, these are the harmonics that are sounding within the chord, and that's reasonably resonant. But it's not as resonant as this first chord here, where we've got the D in here. We've got the same fundamental that's not sounding, this G here, and then we've got this G which is sounding, this D. We've got this fifth at the bottom of the chord. The fifth at the bottom of the chord makes the whole chord sound very resonant. Then there's B and this G here. So this is a very nicely spaced chord because it's got 2 and 3 at the bottom in terms of the harmonics, and that will sound very resonant. And this chord here, the third bar, is not built on this fundamental, but this fundamental here, the top harmonic series. Again, you've got the fifth at the bottom, and then your fourth and the third. So you've got 2, 3, 4, and 5. That's a very resonant chord. Now, if you can imagine this, these 3 chords when played by a string orchestra, you could have the cello here playing this note, the viola playing this D, violin 2 on the B, violin 1 on the G. That'd be fairly resonant. But what would happen if we also on this low G had the double bass? Well, the double bass playing the same note as a cello isn't actually the same note. Of course, the double bass sounds an octave lower. So in effect, if you have this chord in a string orchestra, you would have not just that note, but that note as well sounding in the double bass, if you choose to have the double bass. So the chord with the addition, this particular spacing with the addition of the double bass makes this chord even more resonant. That's less so the case with this chord, but more so the case with this chord because we've got the fifth at the bottom there, which makes it particularly resonant. Here's yet another spacing. We've got the B at the top. This is fairly resonant. G, D, B, 1, 2, 3. Not got the fourth, but the fifth there. A fairly resonant chord, and it doesn't really require the double bass to make it feel fully resonant with the fundamental, because the fundamental is already there at the bottom. This chord here is less resonant again. You're missing the second note there, so we're not getting the nice fifth in the tone, but it's okay. But this final chord is not so good, And the reason for that is this huge gap here between the fifth at the bottom and this G. It will start to sound as if the chord has a hole in it, basically, because we're missing some important notes within the harmonic series in the middle. So basically, we don't want anything bigger than an octave between any of the parts, except the bass and the tenor part, kind of an octave there. But we don't want big gaps and big holes in the middle of the chord. That's a brief introduction to the spacing of chords based on a harmonic series. This works for strings, if you think in terms of string orchestration, or brass or woodwind. The same principles all apply, and indeed these chords are the same applies on the piano as well, as it happens if they've been played as chords. So a quick example just to show you this actually in practice. This is not me, this is Tchaikovsky. Go and listen to the fourth movement, the Fourth Symphony, second movement. This is when the big tune comes in at letter A. And if you look down here, here's a little bit of orchestration where Tchaikovsky has this open fifth. So at the bottom of the lower end of the register, if you like, or the lower end of the oral. What we can hear, we've got this A flat, E flat, A flat, C. So we've got a very rich chord here based on the A flat, an octave. The harmonic C is an octave below that. Of course, it's the double. The double bass is not playing this double bass is actually playing this A flat, an octave higher. So this is the A flat as sounding in the double bass here. So we've got double bass and cello. Horns 1, 2, 3, and 4. So 1 and 3, 2 and 4. That's 1 and 3. This is 2 and 4 sounding. And then there's a gap. Tchaikovsky has a gap. The E flat is not present. No E flat at all in the chord. We've got the oboes and clarinets playing this A flat and C up here. And so what about the E flat? Where is it? Well, E flat is in the string parts. So the strings are playing the big melody. And what Tchaikovsky does is he has a very resonant chord in the bass octave, and misses out the E flat in the treble because it's really covered by the strings playing the melody. So effectively he orchestrates by keeping the instruments out of each other's way. It's a good way of thinking about it, keeping the instruments out of each other's way, and the E flat here and here fills out the melody. And the melody, of course, is particularly resonant because not only is it played at one octave, it's played in super octave, the E flat above here and the E flat below. So it's in 3 different octaves, the melody. So this sounds particularly resonant. So we're going to have a listen to, I'll not play it here because it's Sibelius playing the sound's not so good as the real thing. So we're going to have a listen to a recording and listen to what happens with this when this resonant passage comes in after the more sparse opening of the second movement. So that's just it in practice with real instruments, so you can see a little bit more of practical application of the things we've been talking about. Okay, moving on, we're going to take our top-down method here, and what we're going to do is we're going to just adapt it so that it appears in vocal writing. So I'm actually going to just transcribe all of this into SATB, and then I'm going to adapt it. So I'm starting with my top-down method, and I'm just going to put it in. Okay. So I like the top-down method because it gets something down on paper, so we don't feel like we're staring at an empty canvas with no notes on the page. We've got something to work with, which helps us get going. But then not being happy to settle with that. That's just to get us up and running. What we really want to do is see how we can then improve it. So that's what we're now doing. So I've made the bass part voice 2, and so we've got the B there, D, D, D. That's rather dull. There we have it. And then it leaps up, and we've talked about this horrible leap before, but we'll just pop that back in just now and fix it in a moment. And I think we talked about this either being a D or a G. Let's go for the G there. No, let's do it exactly as printed. So we'll go so D, 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 E, D, D, C, down to B. So there we have it. We've got our passing 6/4 in there now, voiced in terms of SATB. Let's go back to the top here, the second bar. We talked before about this C to F sharp not being ideal, and then we looked at switching these parts around so that the alto takes the F sharp and the tenor will take the A. And we also talked about this nice idea of spacing this chord a little bit differently so that the G and the tenor and the bass moves in contrary motion, as does the soprano and the alto, so that's possible, or we can leave it as the C. I'm going to leave the rest of this just now because this is already reasonably well spaced actually. These chords, we look at here, the G, D, G, B. The reason why it's reasonably well spaced is it's a fairly high bass line and it's a fairly low soprano line, so there are only a few options for the inner parts. So the top-down method already produces reasonably good spacing. Here, this isn't so good though. We could improve this. We've got here an octave and a third, then a unison, and then a fourth. So let's, in terms of vocal writing, string writing, brass writing, this would be a better spacing of the vertical chord. It's just that little bit more resonant. So we'll do that. Every time I change a note, I'm checking that I haven't inserted parallels. So it's not just a case of I can forget all the other rules and just make nicely spaced chords now. I have to think, how does one chord move to the next? So now I've got this G jumping up to this D here. This isn't the best spacing. This top down with this big gap here. So what I'm going to do is I've got the F sharp at the moment in the alto part and the D in the tenor. I'm going to put the F sharp into the tenor, so it's moving down more smoothly. and we're going to put the D into the alto part. So the whole thing is now moving in a much more stepwise or repeated way. Everything's moving in a more smooth fashion, fewer leaps, and the chords are better spaced. So all these chords are nicely balanced now. And having gone down here, I've now got a big leap up here. I might as well just switch these notes around, the G and the D here. So I'll move that down to a G. So this comes back up, checking there are no parallels, and I'll keep the alto on the D, so the alto is now taking the more boring line. We don't have to worry about the inner parts being too interesting. We're not interested in a 4-part counterpoint here. We're interested in the middle parts just filling out the harmony in a nice resonant fashion. So this is looking much better already. And having stayed on the G, F sharp G, I'm inclined to keep the parts moving smoothly. So again, having already started to swap my alto and tenor, I'm going to keep them swapped around and keep that on the G. So this was the G and this was the E, this is now the G and this is now the E. I'm checking I've got no parallels between any of the parts. None of the parts can be in parallel. And I'm going to keep just switching these around. So I'll make this the G and make this the D. And now since this is the D, this is the 6/4 cadence that we talked about, the cadential 6/4. I'm remembering that the G has to come down by step. This is the 4th of the chord, so it has to come down to the F sharp. And it's the alto now that's going to double the bass. Okay, remember that in the 6/4 cadence, cadential 6/4, where the bass is doubled. So that's going to be the D. And supposing I want that nice falling 7, well, this will come down to the B. At the moment, this F sharp is jumping up to the B here, and then the D, which is lower, is jumping to the G, and it's shooting across the position of the F sharp here. So the D is going to a G, which is higher than the original tenor part. That's called overlapping parts. What's wrong with that? Well, it's hard to hear which voice is which, and it's also a little bit tricky to perform and keep the chord in tune. So there are oral and practical reasons why it's not ideal to have the parts leaping over each other like that. So what I'm going to do is actually put this note down the octave, okay? And I'm going to make, since this alto part was a D, it's now gone to a B. I'm going to make the tenor part the D, but not that D because it's now crossed above the alto part. I'm going to put it to the low D. And if it goes down to the low D, I've got this lovely chord here, this nice spacing of the 5th at the bottom, the 6th and the 6th. So I've got a chord which is really beautifully spaced. So the lesson from this is that we want to think a little bit more about how we space our chords in terms of the harmonic series, because the better spaced they are, the more resonant they are. And that becomes a particular issue when we're dealing with string instruments and wind instruments. Remember, these instruments are designed, they're very, very physical design. They're designed to resonate well with one another. So if we write our notes well, so that the chords are well spaced, those instruments will, when played together, will sound at their best. You'll get a good sense of ensemble. You'll get rich, resonant harmony. The second thing we learned was when we have the soprano and the bass parts close together. The top-down method is pretty good anyway because there aren't many notes to choose from, so we already get balanced chords. But as the parts become more spread, we want to think about spreading our chords around. And having used the top-down method, it's often the case you can just switch the alto and the tenor notes around. As long as you double-check you haven't got any parallels. And when you do that, make sure if you get a cadential 6/4 that it's properly voiced, that the 4th falls and the 6th falls, and that it's the bass that definitely doubles. That's basically it. We've got our 2 phrases, beautifully spaced, simply harmonised, still just using 1, 5 and chord 4. So simple harmony, but the principles are all well and good. So let's have a final listen to our harmonisation.